Today is October 10th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. My name is Red Thunder One. My English name is Michelle Robinson. I use she and her pronouns. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche, Jaistakom, Aki. Native Calgary is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed U.S.-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bogani of the Confederacy. These lands are signed September 22nd, 1877 to Treaty 7. Signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney nations of the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. Non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot and members of They've Been Kind to Me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mokinstis has Michelle Elliott, an English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Sat2 Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian. I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having an Indian Act imposed status card. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people, in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe, meaning Many Horse Town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as treaty partner. I also started this podcast because there isn't enough Indigenous voices and media representation, and the silencing and erasure of Indigenous people has to end. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share what I know as I walk down my red road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for showing support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps on whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can also go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. So I have a lot to discuss today. First and foremost, some of the feedback that I got was from somebody basically insinuating that I'm ableist for being unable to accommodate their needs. I reached out to all my social medias, and a lot of people told me that they have the same neurological functioning, and they felt that the podcasts themselves, the apps themselves, actually work properly to accommodate their needs. So I encourage folks who maybe have friends in their life. This past weekend, I was able to see an aunt and uncle from Yellowknife, and they didn't know what apps were or anything like that. And we walked through what a podcast was, and I gave them, I had interviewed one of my cousins, and I had given them that episode. And so I showed them how it works. So if you are a person that's very critical of podcasting, or maybe you're a big fan of them, maybe talk to other people in your life about being able to how to utilize these technologies. I know most podcasts don't post the links, whether it's to YouTube, whether it's to the nativecalgarian.com. And I know that there's a lot of expectations for Indigenous people to do, 10 times the amount of work than non-Indigenous people. So I just ask folks, I try really hard not to be ableist. I try really hard not to be transphobic. And that said, if you are a person who's able-bodied and having other people in their lives that's maybe not downloading podcasts, I sold it to my uncles by saying, hey, did you know that there's probably stuff on Johnny Winters and 1970s rock and roll? And my auntie, I sold, Canadian figure skating because that's her thing. That there's podcasts for things like that. So, just encourage people to have podcasts and listen to them so that they can hear voices they wouldn't normally hear through mainstream media that, as we all know, very few people control. and they control the narrative as a result. So, you know, I really, really hope people will consider doing that. It was actually a lot of fun in the end, showing my family how to utilize it. And I hope that they listen to more podcasts. So, Auntie, if you're listening, because this is the first one that popped up after you subscribed, I know I love you. And I'm so grateful that we got to have that conversation so that that way other folks can move forward. So another thing had happened this weekend to us. We went to a business to have some lunch, and yeah, they made a big deal about IDing my 14-year-old who had a valid vaccine passport. And, you know, at the time, I didn't consider it. I was seeing it as youth discrimination, but you know, my aunt and uncle, my auntie who's Ukrainian, my own family thought she was native. I'm like, no, she's Ukrainian. And then my uncle who's native, you know, was with us, and I was there with my daughter, who's wearing a Sutina mask, and I was wearing, you know, Vote for Maryland North Pagan mask, and kind of dawned on me, as much as we think we white coat, sometimes we're not white coated. And sometimes there are businesses that just don't fucking want natives there. And I sometimes forget that. So yeah, I'm, you know, debating writing the letter to educate them, but at the same time knowing it'll go in one ear, out the other, be met with defensiveness, and it's just a waste of my fucking time because Canadians don't want to do the work. So speaking of Canadians doing the work, yeah, so we've been working really hard as the Reconciliation Action Group, and I'm actually going to share my screen for folks who are watching the YouTube channel. I know a lot of folks are listening, so I'm going to try to talk it through as much as I possibly can. So the Reconciliation Action Group is a group that we started here in Calgary. It really came out of my book club. A lot of folks from my book club were really passionate about changing the name of the Langevin School. And Larry Leach from 12 Community Safety Initiative, you know, he ran for school trustee. So he was interested in this at multiple levels as well. And then we had folks like Rosemary Brown, who has been, you know, decades of anti-racism work under her belt in the city. And some folks that we had Laura Hack, who was running for school trustee. She was a part of the initial group as well. And then of course, the students, their parents, and the group of community that came together as a result, trying to get Langevin name change done. Once that was done, after Calgary Board of Education was shamed into changing the name, there was a few folks that were like, okay, we did our deed and we're done, and they're gone. But there were some others that wanted to continue. So we started kind of rebranding into the Reconciliation Action Group. So with the upcoming election, it was pretty critical for us to put out some questions to some folks, and we did. And I've been sharing the Excel spreadsheets for the two types of candidates. So the first one, the 2021 Calgary candidate question and answers, that's for mayoral and wards. And then we have a second one, and it's the 2021 Calgary school trustee questions and answers. And there were different questions based off of whether or not they were going to go to the school trustee, or whether they were going to go to the Calgary candidate for ward or mayoral. Obviously, I think the very first question is the most important one of, do you acknowledge genocide of Indigenous people in Canada? And lots of folks did a bunch of pretzels in order to not say yes. Other folks said yes immediately. And some folks never even read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, did not read the White Goose Flying Report, have no, you know, Indigenous language in any of their content, et cetera, et cetera. So we did release that. If you are interested, please look up Reconciliation Action Group in Calgary. We're on Insta, Twitter, Facebook. And, you know, it's interesting, as much as we post, how many people will post a comment like, oh my God, well, did you ask this person? But they won't tag that person. And, or what was really disappointing was how many folks actually didn't even, you know, post their answers or have it on their website, so that if you're just a regular Indigenous person and you're like not really plugged into any of the local initiatives because you're busy, you got shit to do, and you're looking on these websites, it's no wonder so many Indigenous are so disenfranchised in voting when it's so painfully clear that that's like last thing on the agenda. So we actually didn't have very many people reply. We had folks that were like, oh my God, I didn't get the email. And it's like, well, I know being a part of campaigns, you have to check your junk and your spam. That's your responsibility. And then on top of that, every time I answered a question when I ran, I posted them publicly so that folks would see what kind of answers I gave, because I thought it was critical that people understood where I stood on certain things in case they missed it for whatever reason and they were doing their research. Me as a candidate would put it on myself to put it up there for folks. Now, of course, I didn't get elected. I only placed fourth. So, now here we are in another election, and it's interesting because I'm seeing, other folks that I ran against endorsing other candidates in Ward 10. And, it's so disappointing because, I just, reconciliation is still not a conversation of topic. Indigenous language is not really being properly utilized. So I do want to thank City News TV. They were the only media that recognized that this was a topic worth covering and put it up on their, I got a video up and an interview, shared it. I couldn't help but notice how, the algorithms of social media does not really put it out there much. So I hope folks will go check it out. And if not, we have a vote. So I actually voted here in Lethbridge, and I wanted to show folks some things that made my decision, because we definitely had, no infrastructure here that I could just latch on right away and know that there's a, Lethbridge Reconciliation Action Group that's grassroots, that's away from, a city that would kind of give you the talking points of what they would like to see anyway. So I went through all of these things. So I voted for Sheldon Joseph Daychief for mayor of Lethbridge because he's native. Had a land acknowledgement. It was really simple looking at people's websites or listening to their video. You're not going to believe this, but there are a lot of folks, incumbents, that didn't even have a website. So what the city of Lethbridge did was give every candidate 2 minutes to speak on a video that they have on their website, which is great. So you can go to lethbridge.ca/election and make up your own mind there. And so I made myself a spreadsheet, and Sheldon Joseph Daychief made a mistake not too long ago. Somebody was really racist to him, and then he denied it was him and said somebody must have hacked his account or whichever deleted it. So I know progressives in my life who wrote him off over that, and I think that's a point of privilege to see that as a progressive who doesn't experience racism, you don't know what it's like to have to combat it every day. And frankly, half the lack of integrity I see in most politicians, I was definitely willing to give him a pass on that. And I really encourage other people too as well, because I think, we are not going to, so many reasons why we should be voting for him. First and foremost, he's Blackfoot and this is his lands. We're in a time of reconciliation. He was the only one who put his name in that's native. So those are all the winners for me. Some honorable mentions. Colton the Maniac MMA fighter has a website that was awful. And a lot of folks are very pro police here because they think that there's lots of crime. And if there's one thing that I've learned here, it is definitely that people are just afraid of natives. So they'll say, oh my God, downtown is so dangerous. And, I've been downtown. I was downtown for the Sisters in Spirit Vigil. I've been downtown to drop off some Narcan to the Sage Patrol. Been downtown for the library is there. So there's lots of reasons to be downtown. And I haven't felt unsafe by the natives. Now, on the flip side, I went to the Sisters in Spirit Vigil, and there was some white folks, and they have a big truck, and they're like Night Watch or something like that. I can't remember what their obnoxious name was, but I asked them if they had seen the Sage Patrol because they presented themselves, and in vests, like they were there to help community. And they were like, yeah, I thought I saw them, but I don't know. So I just kind of looked around and I seen part of the stage patrol literally in front of them. So I think they were being purposely obtuse, as folks will say. I've yet to meet a native that isn't scared for me when I say I've moved to Lethbridge, and I have yet to hear a native say a positive thing. And it is really clear to me, hearing the media, hearing the narrative, this is one of the most dangerous places, literally because you have a city full of Karens and Karen's husbands that are like, oh my God, there's a native walking. Call the cops. How dare these natives think that they should be walking? So it's pretty clear to me. That's why we have the so-called highest crime, which is really just a reflection of racism and very depressing from my point of view. Watching the way that things were said in these elections and their websites in the 2-minute video, it was really clear to me that it was just totally racial prejudice that made them pro-police. So pretty gross, actually. So there were some folks that I was just like point blank, no way. And I just marked them kind of like this pink and said, no, I don't want them. Former Calgary police chief is running here. I'm sure he'll win because, everybody's so afraid of natives that God forbid. So yeah, I voted for Sheldon in the hopes that he'll show the leadership that's needed. There's not a ward system here in Lethbridge, so you have to vote for 8 people. So I was having a look at some of their websites, and there were some ugly things that I really came across, actually. So I reluctantly voted for this Kelty Bard because they are LGBT, but when I see the gay community exclude the Two-Spirit, that really bothers me, because I've seen enough in the gay community of no natives allowed, no Asians allowed, and that really bothers me. So if it's not even in the acronym, which it wasn't, it's really clear to me that this person maybe not be somebody I want to love, but I believe in representation. So obviously I put my vote there because I don't know as a straight cis what it's like to be in that position. Also, as a former GALT board member, so I went there recently, and they're proud to have a noose. They're proud to have a Chinese slur in their Chinese display. So, I definitely see a lot of white feminism with no intersectionality. And, I just find that really disappointing, right? But that said, obviously, there were some really good things I've seen from folks as well, and especially this Kelty Bard, not accepting money from PACs. As a Alberta Liberal, we are really strong on that topic. And I think folks still don't really understand what they are, but it's basically accepting money from a third party. Wow, did she knock me out of the ballpark by saying how pro-choice she was? Which was really positive, because this is a very much, you'll see anti-abortion signs around here everywhere. And instead of saying, pro-choice for women, she used the terminology person, which I think is really important. When you're, as a cis person, you may not see it, but what they're doing is they're acknowledging that trans people can give birth, but may not necessarily identify as a woman. So I really admired that. I was really happy. And she had a lot of pro-environmental, sustainable future type policies, bike infrastructure. And she may not have said that she wanted that per se, but, I'm looking for candidates that are pro-bike infrastructure, pro-public transit, pro-free public transit, because that is an intersectionality of poverty. So anyway, that I figured she definitely would earn my vote. Marissa Black, she had a point about disability in her website that I was like, this is a person we need in there, because if she has a disability, then she has a really strong chance of making the city more accessible for folks who have disabilities. Jeff Carlson got my vote. So, it's funny. Here was an incumbent who had no website. So I was like, what kind of half-hack job is this? But then, I seen his 2-minute video. he had an Oki pin right away, and that made me quite, happy that he would do something like that. And he acknowledged TRC in his 2-minute video. So I was like, yeah, this guy has definitely earned a vote. And I try to remember, I'm in Lethbridge, I'm not in the city where there's an expectation of a certain professionalism. Here in Lethbridge, I mean, I don't even like using that terminology, because democracy should be accessible for everybody, and it's not necessarily accessible for everybody. And I would really love to see nobody put up signs. I'd love to see nobody have extensive websites. I'd like there to be those 2-minute videos that are available for everybody. That's, they're what they said, printable on the city website type of thing. So that just makes it even for everybody. But I know that's not the world we live in. But I thought it was worth mentioning that, these are really important things to say, hey, I'm a bit inclusive. So some other folks, like, they didn't really get the green light. They really didn't get a, red light. They were just okay. So, like, I was really happy that Mark Campbell said they made an MOU with the Blood tribe. And, he really seemed to be proud of their arts community, some diverse ability. He was just a likable candidate, so I can see why he's an incumbent. And some things that really matter to me is that I kind of decided, did they have a land acknowledgement? Did they have some sort of disability inclusivity in their website? And just from that kind of initial thing from looking at, so I didn't think he was the worst, that's for sure. So, like, I won't be upset if he gets elected. Then Christensen, no land acknowledgement, nothing about diversity, but he did say he wanted to abolish photo radar. So that gets a shout out from me, Ben. I didn't vote for you, but hey, that's at least admirable. Linda Carlson, I thought one of her more, like, she had institutional knowledge. A lot of people said, oh, just vote for women. But I'm like, I don't see anything on here that earns my vote, really. Okay, so there's this guy named Reiko, and he was actually the former mayor. And he didn't have a land acknowledgement, he doesn't have a website, nothing. He just had this 2-minute video that I had to look at. And he even says in there, he's like, yeah, well, you might be wondering why I want to be a counselor. And he was basically saying, well, at least this way I can represent you better, because when you're mayor, there's so many extra things you have to do. And, it takes up a lot of time. And I was like, that's the point of being mayor, being that representative of your city. So yeah, I said he has institutional knowledge, which he would, but he did not earn my vote. So Rufa Doria, yeah, I really got the impression this person, so Filipino, white coding Filipino, who's working really hard to be a conservative in a lot of ways, because the colors really represent conservative values in all of their everything that I've seen. But as a Filipino who does a lot of work in community when it comes to multiculturalism, obviously she will experience a lot of sexism and racism. And it might take some time if she were to get into that position, because she has experienced racism and sexism. Maybe she'll be more open to learning about Indigenous issues. So I gave her my vote anyway, even though I was like, I don't know if this is the right person for me. But if I have to give a vote to someone, at least it's somebody who's probably going to experience racism and sexism. Jerry first earned my vote. And it's interesting because there wasn't a land acknowledgement that I've seen, but he had a spirit name, and he started off with Oki. So I thought that was really important. He at least acknowledged the TRC and what he had to say. He acknowledged climate change. He was a little weak on it, but that's okay. But another strength of his that I thought was great was that he was committed to being nonpartisan and denouncing misinformation. And I think in a time when our democracy is so unhealthy because of not just Trump style information, but prior to that, and which, if you've seen my other podcasts on fascism, you'll know I talked about, the series of events that's been happening with the funding of military industrial complex into democracy to basically create an unstable democracy. And most recently, Facebook has been just called right out on it. Edward Snowden did, but now a former executive did as well, and really vindicated as well as the other things we're hearing at the Congress Congress hearing meetings that are public right now. So anyway, gave him one of my votes because I thought it was really important. Few folks didn't really love a lot. Zach struck me as a young poli-sci person who had a cute slogan of "Zach's got your back." And I thought that's just freaking adorable. But yeah, he has his master's in poli-sci, but yet no website. He does a lot of leadership for churches and nonprofits, so I was a little concerned about that. But shout out for a cute slogan. And then a few folks that, if you're anti-safe safe consumption site, you are definitely not for me. If you are a person that sees yourself in these very colonial positions of authority, you are definitely not for me, because I doubt you've worked on your anti-racism bias or anything. So yeah, not for me. Darcy Logan has the cutest signs. I swear to God, I love them. Just the way he spoke, he came across as kind of able-bodied, but he had a really great land acknowledgement, actually. And some of the other people didn't, actually. They were like, they like the expression here in Lethbridge, the plains natives. And I'm like, ooh. And of course, if you don't understand the history of Métis, then I don't love that. But, that's part of my land acknowledgement teaching. Some people are going to take tomorrow morning. And I encourage other folks who don't understand land acknowledgement to please take a course or read up more about it. You don't have to take my course. You can take, there's books on it, there's videos on it, there's so much information out there now. And if you actually just did your research on the treaty, and didn't have me spoon feed it to you, you would still figure it all out. But some folks, they still would like to learn. And of course, that's why we started that, so that folks that legitimately wanted to learn can pay me, and I will happily teach them. So Darcy Logan also supported the Sage Clan, and I think that was really great. He had really great points about healthy democracy, workplace, and again, I just loved his signs. So, definitely somebody, but again, older white male really struck me as like, probably will win, won't be the worst, that's for sure. Shelby Mccloud. I should just change this right now and tell you why it is that I am giving her a full red light. And yeah, it's disappointing. She has like Every Child Matters right on her website, first and foremost. And I no land acknowledgement, but at least the Every Child Matters thing. But the way she spoke about diversity, she's a former PC staffer. There's a lot of folks that are just white saviors, and then I found out later at a BRZ forum, she said some pretty anti-Indigenous bias things. So I'm like, so she's just at first it wasn't going to be the worst, but I'm like, because she had that, I was okay with having an Every Child Matters thing. But she has governance knowledge, and she's straight from the hip. So that's kind of her redeeming qualities. And I think that it would hurt her feelings to know that I didn't think she was very Indigenous inclusive. And that white fragility, of course, is not my problem. That's for her to deal with. But at the same time, it sounds like she needs to really work on some anti-racism training and some Indigenous education, so that she can speak better on the topics that she claims to care a lot about. So Bernie is a Black fellow who was formerly houseless, and he's 20. He's pro-bike, pro-e-scooter, pro-investment into theater. He did have some downsides. A lot of his pro-police stance kind of contradicts his understanding of addiction, but that said, that's not for me to really judge against his addiction understanding. He will unpack that as he goes. My bigger picture is that for somebody who is houseless on the streets and who has experienced racism, he obviously would understand how the gaps work in the city. And I thought his, pro-bike, e-scooter, pro-investment into theater. These are things I care about. And I'm like, you know, this is somebody worth voting for, because if he messes up, it's no different than, you know, a Darcy Logan who's white who does it. And Darcy Logan would get the free pass, but Bernie probably wouldn't because he's black. So I voted for him. Like, there were some folks who had absolutely nothing diversity, a lot of pro-budget stuff. You know, it was a video that I wasted my 2 minutes of time on. Those types of things are available. There was a fellow that probably should get an honorable mention here, and his name is Michael Petricus. This is like the next David Koresh or Charles Manson, 100%. He's this hippie that wants world peace, but the way he speaks about himself is so egotistical. Like, I just really encourage folks to check him out because it's funnier than hell. I actually, we as a family read through his website and laughed for like an hour straight. It was so good. Oh, Jen Prosser. So I not only voted for her, I actually contacted her to give me a ride, and I got to meet 2 of her team. They were lovely folks, and helped out in the NDP campaign that just happened federally. Just lovely people. So I can't thank Jen enough. I just have found all of her information to be everything that I want to hear from counselor. So yeah, I was kind of disappointed. There's a East Indian who has Every Voice Matters, which kind of seems a bit of a like appropriating Every Child Matters, and then no real mention of solutions, but promises to reduce crime. And that's really problematic because a lot of new immigrants have anti-Indigenous bias, but they don't realize it. So I was very concerned about voting for him, and definitely ran out of possibilities by my 8th vote with this guy. So, and I'm not too concerned about it. David Wiggers. I know, it's Davey Wiggers is his name. And yeah, nailed the land acknowledgement. Another thing I really liked about him, he was pro-science, pro-mask, and that's what we need in a global pandemic. So those are my 8 voices, or 8 votes for city council. Next was school trustees, and I'm sad to say only 3 folks earned my vote. A lot of whitewashing type statements, nothing to really indicate that they were pro in inclusion, diversity in any capacity. Andrea Andrzejczyk, like, she started her 2-minute video with a land acknowledgement. I'm like, and then she said the right terminology. It was clear that she had done some education when it comes to truth and reconciliation. So obviously somebody that I wanted to have. Henry Ross Jacobs didn't have a land acknowledgement, but he definitely was pro-modern curriculum, you know, nailed the diversity and the TRC talking points that I want to see in a person. Christina Larkin, just obviously her website really hit me as, yep, this is the right person that I want for sure. A lot of other folks who I thought were just whitewashed, some white progressive thinking people that are just, you know, white feminists really. So yeah, there were some folks I was really disappointed with. I think if you've been on the Galt Museum and you okayed the, you know, noose and so there's a Chinese slur in their Chinese like thing. So I'm not really down for that. Anyway, yeah, and everybody's like, oh, you should vote for all of the women. But like, if people don't have TRC talking points into their, you know, idea of feminism, I don't think they are bringing solutions to the table. Fiscal responsibility is usually a big red flag for me, especially when it comes to a school trustee. For Senate, Karina Pillay, she's very right of center, but better than some of the other choices. And Chad Saunders is the alter ego of Jet Thunders, who earned my vote for mocking this incredible, disgusting Senate vote at all. And then Duncan Kinney is someone Jason Kenney hates. So I thought, yeah, that's a perfect person. He's very pro-union, NDP leaning, but, you know, sometimes I don't see him always on the diversity that I love, but, you know, he gets under Jason Kenney's skin, so that's good enough for me. Voted no for the time change question because it was really clear from some of the scientists that came out that if the question was for the, so there's like, I don't know, daylight saving times and then Mountain Time or however that works, they had it reversed. So they were asking the question, do you want it at this time? Which the scientists said would be really bad for society, for our time clock, our inner time clock, and as a result would have prolonged health effects. Had it been labeled, do you support the other time change? I think the scientists would have been more inclined to say yes. And so then I would have been more inclined to say yes. But as it stood, the way the question was, it was no. The other one is about the transfers. So for those who don't know, Canada does a stupid thing where we have these regular transfer payments that go from the taxpayer to the federal government, and then the federal government gives it to the provinces to distribute to the municipalities. And this is how taxes work. And, you know, Jason Kenney and Stephen Harper did that formula when they were federal. It got tweaked again while they were there, and they all agreed to it. And now, of course, because Jason Kenney hates Justin Trudeau, he's making it an election issue to basically be like, yeah, we hate Justin Trudeau, so let's totally do a re-examining of the transfer payments. When we just had an incredible pandemic that Jason Kenney decided he was going to allow billions of dollars that we were eligible for as Albertans to go, because God forbid he helps his own people during a global pandemic. So yeah, this is really just a waste of time in this whole election, and a reflection of Jason Kenney's poor leadership, and also the dumbing down of democracy with the assumption that people don't understand that how transfer payments work, with the assumption that Alberta somehow isn't getting their fair share. It's so pathetic and just a disgusting play of partisan politics. So of course that got a no from me. In Lethbridge here, we have two other questions that I wasn't really prepared for. One is, the rich people want a third bridge. And I know the progressives I was with were like, well, you know, it's for rich people. And I kind of laughed because I thought, well, infrastructure is infrastructure. And the more accessible you make communities, the less likely, you know, you are going to encourage people to take transit. That bridge will eventually become a transit bridge for that community, who will be forced to have, you know, lower income people at one point in time. So as a city expands, you need infrastructure. So I voted yes for the third bridge. And then the last question was, do you want a ward system in Lethbridge? And this is relevant because like my husband, he did not have the time to go through every single candidate, whether you were a municipal candidate for the councillor or whether you were a school trustee. And I took the time to go through it, obviously, because it was necessary for us to make a vote, and he trusts my judgment. So, you know, I'm giving him my list. He's probably going to go vote the same. He may not. I don't want to assume. And I kind of gave him some of my pros and cons with the assumption that he might want to know. So these were things that really mattered to me. I seem to think that I have missed a disability advocate that I wanted to throw my vote to, that I didn't give an honorable mention to. Able-bodied, talked about Bernie, talked about Jen, talked about David. So yeah, I thought there was one other person who had a disability that I thought, this is somebody I'd still throw my vote behind because of whatever. It doesn't matter. Those are who my votes went to, and you can understand why, what my reasoning was. And the reason why I showed everybody this was because if you are looking into who to vote for anywhere across Alberta, or conversely, once the other provinces have their municipal elections, you know, these are things I'm looking for in your website. So if you are a political candidate and you're wondering how to be more inclusive, like, there are certain things I'm looking for. I'm looking for how Indigenous friendly you are. I'm looking for land acknowledgements. I'm looking for, do you have a lens of disability? Do you have a lens of LGBTQ2+? These are things I'm looking for. And if I don't see it on your website, if I only see things like, you know, pro-police, fiscal responsibility, then I know that you need anti-racism training. I know that you need Indigenous education, and I know you're not a very good treaty partner. These are things I know right off the bat. And if you're not inclusive to me, as a friend of mine who has a disability would say, then you're likely not inclusive to the other demographics that need you to be inclusive. So this is why I vote the way I do. And I don't really give a shit what your opinion is if you're against it. But, I'm definitely willing to hear feedback that is productive. And unfortunately, I just find that in today's day and age that we're not, and that, despite all of the resources I give out about all of these things, that there are still people that are asking for the links and expecting extra work done by me or the Reconciliation Action Group. We had one fellow, and I should mention this as we move on to the Calgary election now. He sent us multiple emails basically trying to control what we posted. So I made a note of it every time, because his last one was, well, I think you misunderstood. And it's like, nobody, I think you misunderstood. So just a quick, if you have the capacity to ask your candidates these types of questions, these are the types of questions we asked. In Calgary, they made the TRC into its own report called the White Goose Flying Report. We wanted to know what, if they had read it and if they would do more on it. It was disappointing, the type of replies that we got about that. We wanted to know what people had done personally on their reconciliation goals. Like, did they read something? Did they watch movies? Have they told other people? Who knows? Disappointing, let me tell you. The Bear Clan Patrol advocates for strong harm reduction strategies, such as safe injection sites. What would you do to ensure the provision of harm reduction programs and services in Calgary? So these are questions we asked. So like Sage Patrol in Lethbridge, that's why I mentioned the one fellow who, does help with Sage Patrol. How would you support a better relationship between Treaty 7 and Calgary municipal government? So again, if you had heard what I had said in a previous podcast or in real life, one of the worst moments of when I ran municipally was when we were at an outreach, and everybody in there did not want to deal with Indigenous people that they have lands with, which was really disappointing. So anyway, I've never heard of regular meetings between the Treaty 7 chiefs and the city council. And I want to see that change. I want to see the same thing change with Lethbridge and anyone else. And this should be like common sense, but it's not, because of the racism that we as Canadian have just allowed to perpetuate to this point. What would you do to engage with Indigenous communities to safeguard the residential school memorial at City Hall? Those answers were surprising. And then lastly, are you willing to reallocate a portion of the Calgary Police Service budget to support Indigenous people in Calgary through programs such as USAY, Awuton Healing Lodge, Bear Clan Patrol, etc.? So like all of these answers are available for folks who want to take the time and go through them. Our school trustees, what we asked them was just slightly different because of the different mandate as school trustees. And a lot of people write this off and like, this is the curriculum, folks. You want your kids to have it. This is where you get it. So do you acknowledge that Indigenous have genocide committed against them? Really important question, because if they're waffling on this, like that's really problematic. So I don't know what is happening here. I'm trying to go through it. How will you support sufficient funds to close the educational achievement gap, especially in high school completion rates between Indigenous or students who identify as Indigenous and other students per TRC called 10? So as somebody who our child had to leave the system because of racism, ultimately, if your school trustee is not acknowledging racism, we're in big trouble. What does decolonizing education mean to you? We thought these were important. Do you believe in that decolonized education would benefit all students? Because a lot of people think this is just for Indigenous, and it's not. This is going to help all Canadians, and including all of the folks that are immigrants. What will you do to ensure the recommendations of the CVE CARES report, especially those regarding professional development, are implemented? So the CARES report was an anti-racism report that was put out that they won't publicly really share with anybody. We know a little bit of it, but ultimately the CVE has to show leadership, and we all seen in the Langevin case that they didn't. What work have you done to towards reconciliation on a personal level? Would you be willing to rename, would you be willing to trigger the renaming process for Sir A. Macdonald Junior High School? I mean, every freaking city and town has a Sir John A. Macdonald School. This has to get changed freaking nationally. So these are the types of questions we asked. Some of the answers were available. Some of our team did some great work about even, putting together graphics to talk about how many people responded and such. So I really hope that folks pay attention to that. And I was really glad I was able to show you some of the things that I was looking for in the city municipal election, even though I don't have the time to do the same questions. I would love to give them to all of them, but unfortunately I just can't. So, these are things that really matter to me, and I hope they matter to you. And I hope you feel that you can do this work in order to make it more inclusive for Indigenous youth where you're at, or Indigenous families in the city or town that you might be considering voting at. So, these are the things that I was looking for. And if you have other things that you're looking for, I'd love to hear about them too. And getting back to the whole, my daughter is 14 and she doesn't have, photo ID. I know some schools have it, but we're homeschooled. And the other thing is that somebody actually was kind enough to post on my Twitter the link that shows that AHS does not force 18 and under 18 to show ID other than their vaccine passport. So, ultimately, definitely feel like it was a no Indians allowed type moment, and the very minimal discriminatory against youth to have this business do it. So my big message to Calgary businesses is that, if you're going to be IDing youth and you don't think that their parents' word is enough and their vaccine passport somehow doesn't work for you, my husband and I have the same last name, for God's sakes. We both had to show our ID. So if that's not good enough, I just know you're being anti-Indigenous in our case, but you're really determining who you want in and out of your business. So I have to admit, it was pretty disappointing. And one of my favorite restaurants, but my family's from Yellowknife. So when they finally get a chance to come down to Calgary and eat at an establishment that they don't have up in Yellowknife, I didn't want to walk out the door, but I wanted to walk out the door because it was clear they didn't want us there. So that's how it makes you feel, folks, just so you know. And if you're putting some, 17-year-old server in this position as a business owner, you're teaching racism, you're perpetuating racism. And if this young girl was thinking this, what has your education taught this young girl? Anyway, I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and cultural safety, first aid. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. I've been telling you in the first 100 episodes, almost all of heretohelp.bc.ca, what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fridkin actually put that together. And if you don't have this like cultural first aid or cultural safety training, folks, you're not making this world a safer place for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2+. Anyway, their work in those cultural action tools, I have said 100 times in my podcast, so please support their work. It's part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to highlight it and repeat it here. Internalized racism or lateral violence is another form of violence that Indigenous and marginalized folks experience by the structure of racism and oppression imposed on these lands. And you can go to racialequitytools.org, What is Internalized Racism by Donna Bevins, to learn more. If you see a Muslim woman being, accosted on the C train, what is that? That is bystander intervention help, do's and don'ts by the American Friends Service Committee. You can go there and find out more on how to be a better person in these situations. And, it's disappointing. I'm on Twitter all the time, and I see a lot of folks who claim to listen to my show not pointing out when people are being racist, not pointing out when people are being anti-Indigenous on even my Twitter, my social media. So, pay attention if you legitimately care. These are things that should matter to you. So Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and in public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they are cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, and folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party or that person will directly negatively impact marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendation of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform and violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting, where people are experiencing racism in the justice, educational, and health institutions with multiple reports that say the same things. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they have no business running. This should be understood by all politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. If you were to Google today how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies, you would find oodles of articles. So please learn how to be a better ally. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today, actually, let's back up. Let's talk about Night Raiders. Night Raiders is Indigenous Hollywood film that was released this weekend. And of course, I wanted to add to the numbers because I know Hollywood only cares about the numbers of people that buy tickets. So I went and seen the movie by myself, and it's so incredible. It's the story of Canada, only without being told it's Canada. It's a post-apocalyptic state where there was obviously a huge war, and they have basically insiders and outsiders, and it's really a story about resiliency by the Cree community trying to create a place to keep their culture, their language, their knowledge away from this new society that's, of course, it's interesting because I think for Canadians, like, they don't understand this is literally how we see them every single day, because Wet'suwet'en is constantly under a threat and attack by guns and RCMP in full tactical gear. A lot of like the Fairy Creek protests, like so many of our people regularly are hurt by the police, and it was even triggering for me as somebody who's done like protests in front of Trans Canada and had like 2 lines of police keeping the people who were telling me build that pipe, that it was okay to kill Indigenous bodies so that they could profit. And I know they were paid by their organization to come down with their signs, and we sure weren't. Anyway, it's really triggering. It's really triggering. If you've been to Indian residential school, it's pretty triggering. I haven't even been, but I could hear. There was one scene. Okay, spoiler alert. Okay, turning off. Okay, good. So, spoiler alert. Like, there was one scene where the young girl had to beat up another young girl in these training academies, and boy, I tell you, I thought that was really. I have one uncle who talked about how it was the other kids who used to pick on him and beat him up, and I was like, this is that scene for him. It's just triggering in general. In like, there's not a single part of it that I can't tell you like how upsetting it is that I can't speak Dene. All of it. It's all in this movie. So if you're a settler, I really think you should watch this movie and then tell us what you think of it, because honestly, this is what it feels like being in your world, where we have a constant, pit in our stomach, where we're waiting to be attacked, we're waiting for our children to be apprehended, we're waiting for the state to ruin our lives because they can. We're going to have a vigil here for Sonny Crazy Bull here shortly because he was killed in custody. And no Canadian seems to give a shit about it. It's no different to me than this movie. Like, my real life example is in this movie. So please go watch Night Raiders. Tell me what you think, because you need to know this is what the Canadian experience is like for Indigenous people. Oh, and another new immigrants, I think it would be really traumatizing for them who've come from war-torn. literally, whether you're Palestinian or you're First Nation in Canada, this is that story. And I don't think that, you know, so-called civilized Western world, who are really the savages, they don't understand what they're perpetuating on Indigenous people. So anyway, really happy to see that movie and to support our Indigenous filmmakers, but also they started off with the Indian Residential School Society line, which I don't give, but the Hope for Wellness helpline is the same, where they give support to Indian residential school survivors. So that's at 855-242-3310. They actually have a texting option at hopeforwellness.ca. I used it once and it didn't work, so I don't know. Like, and I called them and the lady was kind of snot bagged to me about it. So I don't know. I hope it's a good resource, but if not, there is more resources out there, and I'll give you some more. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit hotline at 844-413-6649. It's toll-free 24/7. For non-Indigenous people, there's usually a functioning 211 in your area. There are distress center lines as well, and there's also 833-456-4566. And then for the 60 Scoop folks, there's some information at ssisa.ca, and they use the hashtag survivor driven. If you experience racism, you can also report it to ACT to End Racism, and you can text at 587-507-3838. And that's a coalition of Asian community coming together here in Alberta. So really grateful for their work. The Trans Lifeline is part of the Trevor Project, and they also have like a youth peer support line and a texting option. So go to lifevoice.ca, crisis supports for LGBTQ. Obviously, Two-Spirit, I wish there was more for you as well, but you may find that useful. The Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started this podcast, to speak freely, without interruption, without tone police, without leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions. But on the flip side, we just don't have Indigenous voices that aren't controlled by other people who are gatekeepers, right? So it's really important to support Indigenous media in some capacity, even if it's not mine, just somebody else's. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. I want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through their example, my numerous aunts, uncles, and cousins that guide me every day. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. Although to other Calgarians who say that they're native Calgarians, know that we're kind of making fun of you as Indigenous people, because that sounds racist to call yourself a native Calgarian, because Calgarian's a colonial name. Also, thank you to my husband Darcy for producing and editing this show. On top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, he has supported me down my journey of the Red Road. He's witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, who we are to our child, we are blessed to learn from every day. We are honored you chose us, even though you're taller than us, and remind us every day. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I just hope my family will be proud in the future of us trying to talk about these present day issues. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for already showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts. And if you're on social media, go to my social medias. It's usually a pinned post. And I want to end by giving a side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you come back another time and give me some comments. Take care, everybody.